All right, welcome back. We're at a great Tuesday morning. Back with the Prospect Podcast. I have myself here. I'm in the middle today. We never know in the roulette of when we do the portrait version where we'll end up. Derek is on top today, and our guest, Coach Michael Fahey's on the bottom. We're gonna talk some strength and conditioning, but we're also some speed development, a little Westside Barbell, and I'll talk about what we're talking there in a second. But I also really, and he has it on his shirt there, the OVR um, testing, I guess technology might be the way to put it, but it's really innovative and it's really interesting because I've been diving into it. I'll give a little quick background, obviously because of Simply Faster and um, Tony Holler and sprint based football. I've come familiar with a lot of the stuff that your stuff is on their page, the Simply Faster page, and uh, I go down deep, coach, down the rabbit hole of these things. And so I looked at it, and OVR was one. Actually, last week I almost purchased it. I'm probably going to purchase the coaches package this week because I was looking for something that did a good amount of the majority of what I'm looking to accomplish testing wise within strength. You know, the ability obviously to move the weights and figure out how much uh, I guess power they're generating from the ground. Um, Explosion with the testing for the vertical and those kind of things, and then the speed portion of it, right? Because everybody has like one here and one thing here, and not all, but you actually have all three of those things. The only thing you don't have yet, which you probably will have soon, I'm sure you're going to tell me, is obviously the GPS stuff, which is the only other thing that I'm probably looking for at this point. And but there's a lot of great technology associated with that stuff. So I can't wait to dive into the OVR stuff. To describe Coach is probably to call him a renaissance man within the strength and conditioning space because and I don't want to limit him just to strength conditioning because he's obviously does a lot more. But that's my best way I could put it. I mean, he's been a director. If you guys watch Westside Barbell versus the World, which is a great documentary, I watched it. It's really eye opening with respect to strength development and how that became a prominent thing with respect to Westside Barbell and some of the guys that came out of there. Um, and he obviously was involved in that. And then also everything from being a strength and conditioning coach at Florida High, working actually with high school athletes, training from football players to track and field athletes. He's trained a long jumper that's gone 25-5. I mean, a wide variety of different things, and obviously now producing the technology, which I'm going to bend his ear offline because this is a space that I think is really rapidly growing, especially with AI and the things that can start. You're probably in the early phases, right? First phases of what you're doing in OVR are great, but you're probably your mind's already going to what more can I do, and what more can I develop. So with that, that's the long and the short of it. He really is a guy that's going to be able to talk about a variety of different topics with us. So we're really excited to have Michael Fahey on today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Mike, tell me what I missed here. So, dive into some of the stuff that I did miss because you really have a varied background and and really have accomplished a lot of great things. Talk about kind of your genesis of your career and then how you even got to start in developing OVR.
Yeah. Everything for me is like the same thing. So it looks different to sort of from the outside, but I lean really heavily just sort of into my own story. So I grew up in Tallahassee, Florida. That's where I've moved back to now. Been back for about 6 or 7 years. I was a football player growing up. My dad played football at Princeton. My dad was a stockbroker who was just super into strength and conditioning himself. So we always had like a crew of kids and, you know, athletes of all ages who would come, you know, just train in our garage. At one point we had, you know, a 5-star #1 prospect in the country training in our garage, went on to become a top 10 draft pick. And so my dad's weird passions and obsessions kind of just got passed down on to me. They were presented as sort of so normalized to me that I didn't really understand until much later how like unique that really was. I learned about Westside, and I was, you know, reading Powerlifting USA and watching the old VHS tapes and stuff all the way back in the 90s and the early 2000s. That would just be like what we did. You know, we come home from, me and 3 or 4 guys would come home from school in the off season, open up an entire bag of like Totino's pizza rolls, pop those in the oven, and then we'd maybe watch a little bit of Westside VHS tapes, then go drag sleds out in the backyard. And by the time we were done with that, Totino's are out of the oven, and, you know, we scarf those down and then go hit like a max effort box squat workout. So that was like my childhood. I played a bunch of sports. I'm a relatively large person. I'm about 6'2", 6'3", 250-ish pounds, and that's about where I ended up my high school career. Had some offers, but simultaneously had a weird artistic streak and decided to have a go at trying to do film school. Went to film school for 1 year, and then they had massive budget cuts. I ended up, you know, with 15 other kids getting tossed out of the program just for budgetary reasons. Landed in a tiny little major called media production, which was, I say all the time, like I don't take L's in life, you know, like whenever you get knocked down or forced to sort of deviate, the constraints of that really like distill a lot of things down for you. And so getting kicked out of film school and thinking, you know, like I got the whole world in front of me, then ending up in another major that, you know, I had never really intended on. It narrowed down, you know, that wide golden road that I could walk suddenly was a very narrow path. And that distilled things for me because you couldn't afford to go off, you know, a step in either direction. So just all of a sudden, everything became very decisive. Graduated out of that, moved to LA, got an internship on a documentary called Forks Over Knives, which was a huge like diet documentary. All about, like, it's the reason for the plant-based diet fad of.
I vaguely remember it. Yeah, vaguely remember it.
It's the most watched documentary in Netflix history.
I've seen it.
It was really big. Still like the biggest thing I've been a part of, to put it into context. But I was like a hired gun on that, who just sort of worked my way up through attrition, basically, as people butted heads and whatnot. You know, if someone would quit or get fired, and they'd go, you know, hey kid, can you do this? And eventually I ended up, it was just me and the producer, and I was finishing the film and put that out. Didn't think anything would ever happen with it. Went from there to the NFL Network as an editor, and very quickly they realized, like, you know, you look like one of the football players. There's a lot of, you know, ex-football players there, but generally they would be in more sort of like people forward positions, you know, producers, assistants, things like guys who were getting out of football and trying to get a job in the industry. Right. And I looked like those guys because I was big and muscular and whatnot. And then people would be shocked, like, I wasn't one of those guys. I'd then go back and work in a little edit booth, and no one would see me. And, you know, so when I was in common spaces, everyone thought that I was an ex-athlete who was there for like a sort of career mentorship type deal. And when they realized that I had a background in sports and that I was very nerdy and you know, about I'm super into analytics. I started looking a lot at like Spark scores back then. And when they basically realized all the other editors sort of needed like a translator for them, like literally they had a position where like for those kind of ex-football players and young dudes who like played a lot of fantasy football, all the editors would have someone like that assigned to them, and to sort of like translate the directives of, if they needed a package on, let's say like uh I don't know, Andy Dalton, like
Right.
panning out as in his early years, they might they'd have someone there who'd be like, okay, Andy Dalton is a quarterback for the Bengals. He came from TCU. Yeah, he's the quarterback. He's the one who throws, and
Oh shit.
yeah, like it's oftentimes like very remedial stuff because these very technical sort of production jobs were typically people who didn't play sports oftentimes at any point in their life, but they were
Right.
good, on a keyboard. So I was like this weirdo there, because of that, and sort of because of that, like I kind of flamed out because what I wanted to do was not what they envisioned for me. And then I worked for Travel Channel and I was doing all these different things. I worked on the Bobby Bowden documentary for a little bit. And then one day I said, I'm going to, make my own documentary. And my dad had actually pitched the documentary to Louis Simmons before I had ever talked to Louis. I just sort of said to my dad, like, it would be cool to do a doc on Westside now that they're popular, now that like social media is a thing. This place we went in like the 90s with a little intense troll man at the center. To now, now that it's big, like do a documentary on that. And my dad really pushed starting that sort of against my will almost. And then that led into this like 4-year odyssey of going up to Columbus a few times a year and hanging out for weeks or months on end. And I realized very quickly, I was like, I'm way more interested in talking to Louis about strength and speed development than, making a documentary. Like that was in my mind, my life had always been, or my idea for my life had always been, if things don't work out, I'll go coach high school sports and I'll train kids in my garage like my dad did. That was, and so in my head, there was a lot of like sort of shame associated to that. I thought that was what failing would look like. And then I got to a point where I was like, well, put out Westside versus the World, and was like, this is supposed to be what success looks like. And all I want to do is talk to people about sports and strength and, athlete development. All I want to do is use this stuff that I've been watching and learning, for the last 4 or 5 years. So I moved to Florida with a woman who's now my wife, and very quickly was asked when I got back to Tallahassee. Somebody came to me and said, like, I remember you used to be really big in the weight room. Your old high school, they don't have anyone to do that. Like they could really use some help. So would you come in? And my first day I came home, my wife said, how was it? And I said, I don't think I want to go back, but I told these guys that, like I set up here tomorrow, so I don't know what I'm going to do. At the end of the next day, she said, how was it? And I said, I think I want to quit everything else. I think I just want to coach. And she was like, okay, well, what are they going to pay you? And I said, oh no, this is like voluntary. They don't pay me.
Yeah.
And she's like, like, you don't have that much money. Like we have to make money
Right.
somehow. Like, well, I just successfully like created and sold like a documentary about powerlifting. I'm sure I can think of something.
Right.
And from there, I had bought jump mats and I had bought lasers and I had bought VBT. So I had all these toys, hence the Netflix money was running out fast. I had all these toys and they were all cool ideas, but they all felt unfinished. The customer service was terrible. I was just like, it doesn't feel like anyone is like trying to actually make a like sustainable business that serves people within the space. Everyone's sort of like, it feels like trying to exploit a half-cocked idea that they have. And I was working with some people. I was doing a lot of consulting around that time because a lot of people had commercially benefited from Westside versus the World. um, sales on, belts and powerlifting, bodybuilding. If you were in the strength sports little area, I was making you money. And
well, hell, the Westside Barbell T-shirts sell millions of those they've sold.
Yeah. So everyone else was making a lot of money off of my movie, and I was working directly with some people to make a little bit back. But I ended up talking to one person who's now my partner, or one of my partners, and said, like, I have this other idea that I think could be even bigger. And I think that there's this opening within the market. There's this whole like style of, I was like, think of every, he had watched Westside versus the World. So I was like, think about how they train in that, how everything's based on speeds and special strengths. And I said, do you understand this is also how people train for, like, say, the NFL Combine? And this is how elite athletes train. It looks a little bit different, but it's the same principles. Like, this is where that comes from. But no one has sort of like understood how you tap into that yet. So I said, like, this is less crazy than trying to recoup money on a powerlifting documentary, and I did well on that. So, I convinced this guy to sort of fund this crazy endeavor. And we went out and found an engineer who is now my, co-founding partner, Adam. And now that was like, that all started in like 2019, 2020. And now, 6 years later, and OVR has been out on the market for about a year and a half. And we've got VBT, timing gates, jump devices, broad jump mats. We got a lot of stuff, and it all sort of stems from serving what my needs were in terms of the first high school that I was at, and their dingy gym with, dirty old broken equipment, figuring out, like, how do you make this stuff that allows a great number of people to train in like a real world setting where people don't have sports science labs and they don't have sports science lab budgets, and you've got way too many kids and way too few coaches. And like, how do you make technology that isn't about just testing, but it's about training? How do you audit your training without slowing it down? So that's in a nutshell, and now I'm here.
It's that's a great story, incredible genesis of where it is. And I didn't realize that the OVR was tied to some of the things you guys did in Westside Barbell. It's interesting because the space in the timing, it's like everyone's throwing things up. You know what I'm saying? They're throwing different things up there. Some of it works well, some of it doesn't work well, and but everybody's trying to jump into the space. And I think like the sprint-based football stuff, like their coordinated effort with the Football Track Consortium started bringing a lot more of these things to light, which creates more people creating things that. But I agree with you. A lot of the stuff, like when I try to one of the things that when I was diving and looked into your stuff, like when I go watch videos on these things, I'm like, okay, that does one thing, you know what I mean? Or that's great. So I'm going to pay $3,000 for one thing, you know what I mean? And it doesn't make a lot of sense, like as far as how some people have designed some of the stuff, right?
Yeah.
From a financial standpoint, like, and then you go and you look and you're like, okay, well, there are probably better ways to do it. You need to be, to me, it's like as a coach, and you probably think about it this way. I want to be able to get something that covers as many as the bases as possible for my athlete from a training standpoint, and then obviously testing standpoint. And I thought one of the things that Westside Barbell did, obviously, because you're always competing to try to be able to move the bar and move the weight, higher amounts. And what sprint based football with the whole, not that any of this, not that some of this stuff is revolutionary. It's just putting packaging around it, but
Yeah.
but you know, record, rank, and publish stuff I think is important, right? I mean, you know, I guess record, rank, and publish. That was probably what I was doing when I was running 100 football combines around the country, right? Obviously, we were record, ranking, and publishing, but the packaging of it, bringing it more to light in a concerted effort among multiple people to do that, starts to like stimulate a lot of people's brains as to, okay, what can we do? And one of the things that I like that you're doing is you're trying to package it so people who are looking to train and be able to test and to be able to measure each one of these components. And I think that's where your Westside Barbell experience is different than just the sprint-based football guys, right? Because you also understand how the movement of the bar can help the other stuff you're trying to do as well, right? On the field, off the field, speed, and all that, those kind of things.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to talk about your approach on that, because there's a lot to dive into here, but I think that's one of the things. You know, correct me if I'm wrong. If I were to get inside your head, I see what you're doing with OVR. You're trying to put those pieces together so people have the full picture to be able to develop the athlete completely, if I'm not mistaken. So I'll let you dive in from there.
Sure. Yeah, as far as like how OVR kind of plays into that, yeah, in terms of developing it again, it started the idea and where it started from came from serving my needs as a coach. And I'm extremely, yeah, conjugate is the sort of language that I speak. I'm all about using different speeds, manipulating speed and time. Yeah, speed, time, and tension are the concepts really at the core of like all of my training philosophies. And even I was speaking at a conference years ago where I said, gosh, what was it? That like training is reconciling the effects of time. Storytelling is also reconciling the effects of time. Like that's why I say again, like to other people, everything that I do sometimes looks disconnected. But to me, and from the people who have like known me for a really long time, if you were to like find some of my old high school teammates, when I say what I'm doing to them, they don't really like bat an eye at it. It seems like almost linear and motivated. Like they can see how I went from step to step to step. They're like, oh yeah, of course you went off and you made a diet thing. And then, like, oh yeah, and then you were working for Travel Channel, like, and then but now you're back doing the thing that you've always done, which is training. And yeah, we remember you trained that way. You were all about bar speed, so of course you made a bar speed thing. And we would jump all the time in the garage, so of course you have a jump thing. And we'd sprint all the time, so of course you have timing gates. And when I talk to coaches who come more from the sprinting based side of things, we get hung up on language. To me, the speed is speed, whether that's slow or fast. That's the nature of the speed. But speed, the rate at which things are moving, that's a concept. Humans are slow. There's nothing that humans do fast, right? So once you give up on the idea of like slow and fast, it's just movement is just movement. So, isometric, you're moving at 0. You're exerting force and tension, and moving at 0 means you spend more time exposing yourself to force and tension at, say, those joint angles, or maybe you're giving yourself more time to light up more motor units, create a larger stimulus that way. And then, max effort, you're moving at whether it's like 0.15 on a bench or 0.2 on a squat, you're moving relatively slow. And again, just relative, because everything that we do is slow. Usain Bolt is slow compared to a cheetah.
Right.
And a cheetah is slow compared to a car, and a car is slow compared to a plane, et cetera, all the way out to the speed of light. I'm also really weirdly into like physics and again, concepts of reconciling time. But so all that said, like when I would look at, say, something like feed the cats, I go, well, that's just Prilipin's chart. You know, like if you're training, let's say Bulgarian, right, and you're doing a daily max. Okay, so you're working up in a matter of just a few sets to a near maximal effort, maybe 95 to 100%, and you can only do that effort. You know, you can only hit 2 to 3 efforts over 90% if you're going to hit your peak. Okay, well, let's just apply that to sprinting. You can only hit a few efforts over that 90% to hit your peak. It's the same thing. We go, well, these guys are wearing Chuck Taylors and squat suits, and these guys are wearing, Nike Max. Right. Yeah, these guys are wearing super spikes. Right. These guys are on a platform. These guys are on a Banon track. But it's the same thing. We've called it different. We've dressed it up differently, but it's the same thing. I was talking to someone literally this morning about concepts of acceleration. And again, I tell people all the time, like, I'm much more strength biased than most people who are like within this space. There's a lot of strength people. There's a lot of Westside people who are extremely strength biased, but they don't like to deal with like the high speed movement on the other side. At the slow, if you were to define like sort of my training, the spectrum that I exist on, it's we slow things down and we use time to our advantage to create more tension, to create the adaptations that raise our potential force. And at the other end of the spectrum, we move in between, but as we move to the other side, it's, say like if I'm working with a pitcher, that pitcher never runs, right? Within his sport, he never runs. Within his sport, the fastest thing that he does is pitch the ball. And if you throw 90 miles per hour, that's pretty fast, and that's pretty neurally taxing.
Correct.
And that requires a lot of coordination.
Damn right.
But pitching and what your body is doing when you pitch is relatively slow compared to max velocity sprinting. So just as I said this to Tony Holler once, we were talking, and I said, like, you talk a lot about speed reserve. And guys who are training for, say, the 225 rep test, if I was talking to Bill Gillespie about 225 rep tests, he'd say, like, you just get as strong as you can, because what's going to limit you is going to be your absolute strength, because you only have about 30 seconds before you gas out, right? So you don't train your strength endurance for that test. You raise your absolute strength. So you have a strength reserve. Strength reserve, speed reserve, that's the same thing in my mind. It's just a reserve of an important quality. Absolutes have primacy over their developmental qualities. So you can't have strength endurance. That's a developmental quality of strength. So you need more strength in order to have more endurance. You need more speed in order to have more speed endurance. And likewise, rate of force development, you can't out jump your squat. You can't out accelerate your max V. So those absolutes are like limiters on the whole system. But likewise, and this is why within, say, field or court sports where, you might never come close to touching max velocity. It's a third sort of reserve that I talk about, and it's a neural reserve. The most stressful thing that you can put your nervous system through, and I've talked like to Rolf Ullman on my podcast about this, is organizing a movement in an increasingly short amount of time. Yeah, right? Like if we add, that's how training works. We add time that allows us to add tension. We create that added tension because we're able, through that added time, to stimulate more motor units. This is sort of why, like Louis Simmons would say, you can't lift a heavy weight slow. You have to stimulate enough motor units to create the tension to overcome that weight. If it takes you too long, you fail that rep. You might have had the motor units, but you have to coordinate them fast enough to meet the demands of the activity. Sprinting, and where people start saying things that I, get really sort of triggered by, like, strong enough. Sprinting it's the ultimate test of, and when I say sprinting, I mean like max velocity is the ultimate test of the organization of the system within very narrow time demands. So the faster you can run, the easier organizing submaximal movements becomes. So the faster your body can move, the slower pitching now feels relative to the demands, relative to the capacity of the body's ability to organize. The faster you can sprint, the slower, relatively, the demands of acceleration are. Likewise, you're still dealing with time, so you have to be able to accelerate fast enough so that you can use the available time to improve your max velocity sprint. You're only going to